Fossil fuel power plants are having an increasingly difficult time competing with renewable alternatives, but don't expect that Trump and the Republicans are just going to let them die off. They have a new plan. According to a draft memo obtained by Bloomberg News, the Department of Energy, through an act of emergency authority, may order grid operators to buy electricity from coal and nuclear plants that are at risk of retiring due to increased use of cheaper natural gas and renewable electricity. We want to read a couple of sections from this plan. It says, too many of these fuel-secure plants have retired prematurely, and many more have recently announced retirement. Federal action is necessary to stop the further premature retirements of fuel-secure generation capacity. And the plan is expected to last for 2 years, allowing time for a federal study of vulnerabilities in the US energy delivery and grid system.
Wow.
So basically, these grid operators are gonna buy electricity from the source that can sell it to them for the cheapest. That isn't coal. But whatever, who cares? Maybe solar is increasingly competitive, maybe it's cheaper. We're not going to accept that. We don't have a free market. No, we're going to force you by law in reference to, we're gonna use 2 measures. One was, I think it was last used by Truman to require you for national defense, national security purposes, you're gonna have to buy electricity from these coal plants.
Solar.
That's amazing.
Solar is cheaper.
Yeah.
Wind is cheaper. Solar and wind are the cheapest forms of electricity that we can have.
Yeah,
and
but now they're outlawed effectively.
Well, this is also building on an Obama era policy that said we should retire coal-fired power plants, right? This was the Clean Power Plan. Unfortunately, that policy was also misinformed because it said we should build natural gas-fired power plants. So we're currently looking at 300 proposed fracked gas power plants in the United States. Now fracking and coal are competing for our electricity power generation because of both of these bad policies. What we should be doing is saying, okay, let's build solar, let's build wind capacity, let's build geothermal in America because we know renewable energy can power 100% of everything that we need in the United States and not do things like poison your water supply, increase global warming, rip apart communities, toxify lands, all of those negative impacts of the fossil fuels. And this, of course, is another political move that will be at the expense of the planet and also the expense of ratepayers. This stuff is much more expensive.
Yeah.
We need to be phasing out all fossil fuels. And this is obvious, a Trump policy that's designed to prop up a dying industry for political reasons.
Well, what's interesting when you mention the point about hurting ratepayers is there's a whole bunch of Trump policies that are going to come home to roost before the 2020 election. Right now, you get the illusory headline of it that might satisfy his base, but in the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to have a lot of working people, including a lot of working people who voted for Trump. They're going to be facing higher taxes when this tax bill comes due, higher rates because of this free market interference with coal. So it's interesting to consider if maybe Trump is thinking a little bit short term and will pay for it in the 2020 election.
Yeah, and additionally higher prices for consumer goods due to the tariffs.
Exactly.
So there's an argument to be made that you could force the guys running the grids to get use solar or wind because you can say, look, if it were more expensive, and it's not, but if it were, say, yeah, but we're protecting the community because we don't want the pollution, we don't want the climate change, and we don't want the other costs that are built into those fossil fuels to be spread out across the whole state or country, right? So there's some logic in that. But this has no logic. It's more expensive and does pollution and does climate change. And so the only rational explanation for it is crony capitalism. So the coal guys gave me money, they're my donors, so I'm gonna force another private company to buy from them. The government is going to force them to buy from my donors. Yeah. Can you imagine anything that is bigger crony capitalism, corruption, and big government? Now look, you could be in favor of this policy, that's okay. I mean, I think you're weird if you are, unless you're in the coal executive, I get it, right? But you can't be in favor of this policy and say you're against big government. You just can't do both those things. It's impossible.
It's also going to really harm one of America's biggest growth industries right now, which is solar power. Yep. Solar power installation is one of the fastest growing jobs in America. So what they're trying to do is fight against that rising tide of renewable energy that's saying, we can do this cheaper, we can do this better, we can do this cleaner, we can do this safer than coal. I mean, we're still burning rocks for electricity. Yeah. That is not 21st century technology. And it harms everyone throughout the entire process, whether that's mountaintop removal for coal, whether that's near where the coal is being burned. You're talking about increased asthma rates. And a lot of these are environmental justice issues as well, because these coal-fired power plants are put in poor people's community, mostly people of color community, and that causes a health crisis in those
But
places.
we shouldn't be surprised by any of this, because the Trump playbook is pretty clear. To him, America is like a home, and he's a robber stripping the home of everything it's got, including the wiring on the piping. And it also makes sense because crony capitalism is right out of the playbook of his political Yoda, Russia. I mean, Russia, coming out of communism, invented this whole unfettered crony capitalism of strip all public goods for the donors and the oligarchs. Well, replace oligarchs with Trump's donors, and you have a clear explanation of what he's doing to the economy.
Yeah, and in terms of resources, if you need a reminder of the big example of this, Grand Staircase, Bears Ears, he decided these gigantic monuments, let's just sell them off. The whole thing, let's just dig them to hell and give them to the highest bidder.
Could you imagine if Obama said, all right, these different operators, corporations, whatever they might be, you must buy only from my donors? Could you imagine what Republicans would have done?
Yeah.
There's a positive example at work here, though, here in California. This state is requiring all new construction to have solar panels on the roof. That's kind of amazing. Also, this state is doing what no other state in the union is doing, really aggressively saying, we don't want gas-fired power plants, frack-fired power plants. We want to use solar and batteries. So it's totally possible. This technology is outmoded. It is old. It's like saying, you can't have a cell phone. You must go back to a rotary dialer or something like that. It's a cultural policy based on this idea of nostalgia for the 50s. There's a whole sort of set of cultural modes that are being employed by this kind of thing. It's saying, oh, let's go back to when black people couldn't vote. Let's go back to when we had the coal industry. Let's go back to our industrial base. And instead of actually doing things that promote peace and justice, that promote empowerment of communities like solar and wind too.
Yeah, and the last point I want to make on this is the argument that you will hear made for this policy and whatever comes after it is that this is necessary for national security. Because the solar energy and other forms of renewable energy, they're not stable or reliable enough throughout the day. And so there are periods where we might not be able to generate enough electricity, especially if there was intense weather or a cyber attack. I would argue that if you're gonna make that case, maybe you could at least pretend that you care about cybersecurity and actually do something about it. Or alternatively, maybe instead of giving $1.8 trillion to corporations and the wealthiest Americans, you could take a tiny fraction of that and actually subsidize research and development of battery technology.
It's already there. Here in California, we are not building gas-fired power plants. We're not building frack-fired power plants. They're instead using solar peakers and batteries, which are shown to be cheaper, more efficient. We're there. We're already there. So, to go to coal is just ludicrous.
Let's end on Arnold Schwarzenegger's tweet about this. Former governor of California, even though he was a Republican, he said, I eagerly await the administration's regulations protecting pagers, fax machines, and Blockbuster. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.